To understand the conflict that erupted in October 2023, we must first delve into the historical context that has shaped the region for decades. The roots of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be traced back to the early 20th century with the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the subsequent British mandate over Palestine. Tensions between Jewish and Arab communities escalated as both groups laid claim to the land, leading to a series of violent confrontations. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan to create separate Jewish and Arab states, but the plan was rejected by the Arab states, leading to the First Arab-Israeli War in 1948. The war resulted in the establishment of the State of Israel and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, an event Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, or catastrophe. Over the decades, multiple wars and uprisings known as intifadas have occurred, each leaving deep scars on both sides. The Gaza Strip, a narrow piece of land along the Mediterranean coast, became a focal point of this conflict. Following the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel occupied Gaza, and in 2005 Israel unilaterally withdrew its settlers and military from the territory. However, the withdrawal led to internal Palestinian strife, culminating in Hamas seizing control of Gaza in 2007, leading to an Israeli blockade. The blockade, combined with periodic military operations and rocket fire from Gaza into Israel, created a cycle of violence and retaliation. International efforts to broker peace, including the Oslo Accords in the 1990s, offered glimmers of hope but ultimately failed to resolve the deep-seated issues. These historical grievances, coupled with ongoing political and territorial disputes, set the stage for the devastating conflict that erupted in 2023. The Gaza Strip, a small coastal territory bordering Israel and Egypt, has been a focal point of conflict for decades. Home to more than 2 million Palestinians, Gaza has been under Israeli blockade since 2007, limiting the movement of people and goods. This blockade, coupled with recurring outbreaks of violence, has resulted in dire living conditions for many Gazans, with limited access to essential resources like clean water, electricity, and healthcare. The ongoing tensions between Israel and Hamas, the militant group that governs Gaza, have created a volatile environment marked by periodic escalations and ceasefires. These underlying issues, rooted in historical grievances and political disputes, created fertile ground for the outbreak of a devastating conflict in October 2023. The years leading up to 2023 witnessed a steady increase in tensions, with both sides accusing the other of violating previous agreements and perpetrating acts of aggression. The situation was further complicated by internal Palestinian divisions, with Hamas and Fatah, the other major Palestinian political faction, locked in a power struggle. The international community, while calling for restraint and a peaceful resolution, struggled to find a lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Against this backdrop of simmering tensions and a complex geopolitical landscape, the events of October 2023 marked a turning point, plunging Gaza and Israel into another chapter of a seemingly endless conflict. On October 7, 2023, a day that would forever be etched in the annals of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Hamas launched a surprise attack on southern Israel. The assault, unprecedented in its scale and ferocity, involved a coordinated infiltration of militants into Israeli territory, targeting civilians and military installations alike. The attackers unleashed a barrage of rockets, striking towns and cities across southern Israel, sowing terror and chaos among the civilian population. The images of burning buildings, fleeing families, and the wounded being carried to safety sent shockwaves across the world. The Israeli government, caught off guard by the audacity of the attack, declared war on Hamas and vowed swift and decisive retaliation. The Israeli Defense Forces mobilized troops and launched airstrikes against targets in Gaza, marking the beginning of a brutal military campaign. The Israeli government also imposed a complete siege on Gaza, cutting off electricity, fuel, and essential supplies, further isolating the already beleaguered population. The October 7th attack and the subsequent Israeli response marked the start of a new and even more violent chapter in the Gaza conflict, pushing the region to the brink of a humanitarian disaster. As November 2023 descended upon the region, the situation in Gaza deteriorated rapidly. The Israeli air campaign intensified, with fighter jets and drones pounding targets across the densely populated strip. Residential buildings, hospitals, and infrastructure were reduced to rubble, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. The relentless bombardment forced hundreds of thousands of Gazans to flee their homes, seeking refuge in UN-run schools, mosques, and other makeshift shelters that offered little protection from the bombs. On November 19th, the Israeli Defense Forces launched a ground invasion of northern Gaza, escalating the conflict to a new level of intensity. Israeli troops, backed by tanks and artillery, engaged in fierce street battles with Hamas fighters, who responded with rocket fire and guerrilla tactics. The fighting trapped civilians in a deadly crossfire, with reports of heavy casualties on both sides. International calls for a ceasefire went unheeded as the violence raged on, turning Gaza into a living hell for its inhabitants. The November ground invasion marked a turning point in the conflict, pushing the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza to the brink of collapse. By December 2023, the conflict had engulfed the entirety of the Gaza Strip, with the Israeli Defense Forces shifting its military operations southward towards Khan Yunis and Rafah. These areas, home to a large concentration of Palestinian refugees, soon became the epicenter of the fighting. The Israeli military, citing the presence of Hamas tunnels and rocket launchers, continued its relentless bombardment, causing further destruction and displacement. As the new year dawned, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza reached catastrophic proportions. Hospitals, overwhelmed with casualties and lacking essential medical supplies, struggled to cope with the influx of wounded. The UN Relief and Works Agency warned of a looming public health disaster, with shortages of clean water, food and medicine threatening to unleash deadly diseases. The international community, while condemning the violence and calling for a ceasefire, seemed powerless to stop the bloodshed. The first months of 2024 painted a bleak picture of a conflict with no end in sight, leaving the people of Gaza trapped in a cycle of violence and despair. Section 5. February through April 2024, looming famine and the failure of diplomacy. The early months of 2024 witnessed a horrifying new dimension to the Gaza crisis, the spectre of famine. The Israeli blockade, now in its 7th month, had crippled Gaza's economy and shattered its infrastructure. Food, clean water and medicine were in critically short supply, pushing the already vulnerable population to the brink of starvation. The UN issued dire warnings of a looming famine, with children and the elderly particularly at risk. Despite the escalating humanitarian crisis, diplomatic efforts to broker a ceasefire remained elusive. Hamas, demanding a complete lifting of the blockade and the release of Palestinian prisoners, refused to lay down arms. Israel, determined to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities and unwilling to negotiate under fire, continued its military campaign. The international community, divided and unable to find common ground, watched on as the crisis spiraled out of control. The failure of diplomacy during this period underscored the deep-seated mistrust and conflicting narratives that fueled the conflict, leaving the people of Gaza trapped in a humanitarian catastrophe. Section 6, May to June 2024. The battle for Rafah and a glimmer of hope. May 2024 marked a turning point in the conflict, with the IDF launching a limited ground invasion of Rafah, a key border town between Gaza and Egypt. The offensive, aimed at destroying Hamas tunnels and cutting off supply lines, intensified the fighting and resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. The battle for Rafah, fought amidst densely populated neighborhoods, further exacerbated the humanitarian crisis, displacing thousands and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. However, amidst the escalating violence, a glimmer of hope emerged in early June. Under intense international pressure and facing mounting criticism over the civilian death toll, Israel agreed to a temporary ceasefire, allowing for the delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza. The ceasefire, though fragile and limited in scope, provided a much-needed respite for the beleaguered population, allowing aid organizations to deliver essential supplies and provide medical assistance. Despite the temporary lull in fighting, the underlying issues that fueled the conflict remained unresolved, leaving the future of Gaza uncertain and precariously balanced. Section 7. The humanitarian catastrophe, a crisis of unprecedented scale. The human cost of the 2023 to 2024 Gaza conflict was nothing short of catastrophic. The relentless bombardment, coupled with the crippling blockade, plunged the Strip into a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented scale. Thousands of civilians, including women and children, lost their lives, their futures extinguished amidst the rubble. Hospitals, overwhelmed with casualties and lacking essential supplies, struggled to cope with the influx of wounded. The destruction of infrastructure, including power plants, water treatment facilities, and sanitation systems, created a breeding ground for disease. The lack of clean water, food, and medicine exacerbated the already dire humanitarian situation, pushing the population to the brink of starvation. The psychological toll of the conflict, particularly on children who had witnessed unimaginable horrors, was immeasurable. The 2023 to 2024 Gaza conflict left behind a legacy of trauma and despair, with its impact felt long after the last bomb had fallen. Section 8. The International Response, Condemnation, Diplomacy and Division. The international community's response to the 2023 to 2024 Gaza conflict was marked by a mixture of condemnation, diplomatic efforts, and deep divisions. The United Nations, while condemning the violence and calling for a ceasefire, struggled to find a unified approach to address the crisis. The United States, a staunch ally of Israel, faced criticism for its unwavering support of the Israeli government, often blocking UN resolutions that were critical of Israel's actions. The conflict also sparked protests and demonstrations around the world, with people taking to the streets to express their solidarity with the Palestinian people and demand an end to the bloodshed. However, the international community's divisions, reflecting the complex geopolitical realities of the Middle East, hampered efforts to find a lasting solution to the conflict. The 2023 to 2024 Gaza conflict highlighted the limitations of international diplomacy and the urgent need for a more effective and unified approach to addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Section 9. The unfinished war looking ahead at a precarious future. As of June 2024, the future of Gaza remained uncertain, with the conflict seemingly locked in a stalemate. While a fragile ceasefire was in place, the underlying issues that fueled the conflict remained unresolved. The question of Gaza's reconstruction, a daunting task given the scale of destruction, loomed large. The international community pledged billions of dollars in aid, but the delivery of assistance was hampered by the ongoing blockade and the lack of a clear political roadmap. The future of Gaza hinges on a number of factors, including the willingness of both sides to engage in meaningful negotiations, the lifting of the blockade, and the international community's commitment to supporting Gaza's reconstruction and development. The alternative, a return to violence and bloodshed, is unthinkable yet all too possible. The 2023 to 2024 Gaza conflict served as a stark reminder of the human cost of this intractable conflict and the urgent need for a just and lasting peace.